The man on my doorstep was practically trembling, his eyes wide with a reverence I hadn't seen in 30 years. He wore a tweed jacket, the kind that looked expensive even with elbow patches, and his silver hair was swept back from a face I recognized from television documentaries. "Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice a hushed whisper. "It's an honor. I'm Dr. Alistair Finch." From behind me, in the living room, my son Mark snorted. "Mom, tell the weirdo to get lost. We don't need any more solar panels." My daughter Chloe didn't even look up from her phone, just sighed with theatrical boredom. "Honestly, Mom, don't you know how to handle solicitors? It's pathetic." They saw a tired old woman and a strange man at the door. They didn't see the world's most celebrated botanist, a man who had advised kings and governments, begging to see the one thing they had spent their entire adult lives calling useless: my garden. They had no idea that this one conversation was about to make their inheritance, the money they were so impatiently waiting for, vanish into thin air. Dr. Finch leaned in slightly, his gaze fixed on me. "Your garden. It's real, then? The rumors are true?" He was talking about my Lumina orchids, of course. The flowers that bloomed only in moonlight. The ones my children called creepy weeds. How did I end up with 2 children who despised the very source of my joy and, as it would turn out, my salvation? To understand that, you have to go back to the day their father died and left me with nothing but a mortgage, 2 broken-hearted kids, and a tiny, unassuming seed he told me to protect with my life. My son Mark, now a self-proclaimed financial genius who was constantly asking me for money to cover his latest bad investment, used to trample my flower beds with his friends. Chloe, who now documented her lavish, debt-fueled lifestyle online for strangers, once poured bleach on my prize-winning roses because she was angry I couldn't afford the designer prom dress she wanted. For years, they saw my garden as a symbol of everything they resented. A lack of money, a mother who was too busy tending to plants to focus on their endless wants, a constant reminder that we weren't like the other richer families in town. They were about to learn, in the most public and humiliating way possible, just how wrong they were. I smiled warmly at Dr. Finch, deliberately turning my back on my children in the living room. "Of course, Doctor. Please come in. The garden is just through the back." His face lit up with pure, unadulterated joy, the expression of a man who had found his life's purpose. As he stepped over the threshold, Mark called out again, "Mom, seriously? Who is this guy? If he tries to sell you a timeshare, I'm kicking him out." I didn't answer him. The background noise of their entitlement had become like the hum of the old refrigerator to me, always there, but easily tuned out when you were focused on something more important. I had paid for Mark's business degree by taking on night shifts cleaning offices, scrubbing the toilets of executives who made more in an hour than I did in a week. He repaid me by giving me condescending lectures on my poor financial planning because I chose to buy heritage seeds instead of upgrading my 10-year-old television. Chloe, on the other hand, thought my garden was an aesthetic crime. "It's so messy, Mom," she'd complain, wrinkling her nose as she stood by the back window, careful not to get any dirt on her pristine white sneakers. "It doesn't have a theme. It's not Instagrammable. People will think we're poor." She lived in a chic downtown apartment I co-signed for, a place filled with beige furniture bought on credit. Her entire life was a performance for an audience of strangers, and my patch of earth, with its wild, untamable beauty, was a blemish on her carefully curated brand. What neither of them understood was that the garden wasn't a hobby. It was a promise. Their father, Robert, was a botanist, not a famous one, but a patient and brilliant man. The week before he passed, he gave me a single, gnarled seed that looked like a tiny pebble. "Protect this, Mary," he'd whispered, his voice weak. "This is our family's real inheritance. Don't let anyone see it until it's ready." For 20 years, I had honored that promise. I had cultivated the seed into a small, thriving grove of the world's only known Phalaenopsis lumina, the moonlight orchid. It was a plant that absorbed sunlight all day, but only released its petals after dusk, glowing with a soft, ethereal bioluminescence. It was my secret, my connection to him, and my sanctuary from the thankless world I inhabited. I led Dr. Finch through my small, tidy kitchen, past the chipped Formica countertops and the old stove I'd had for 25 years. He didn't seem to notice the humble surroundings. His eyes were locked on the back door, which opened into my sanctuary. The garden wasn't large, just a small suburban plot, but it was dense with life. Roses climbed a rickety trellis, tomato vines overflowed their cages, and beds of herbs scented the air. To a casual observer, it was a chaotic but loved space. But at the very back, shielded by a row of tall sunflowers, was a small, crudely built greenhouse I'd assembled myself from old windows and scrap lumber. Inside, in the shaded, humid air, were the orchids. Even in the daylight, with their petals closed, they were mesmerizing. Their leaves were a deep, velvety green, and the unopened buds held a strange, pearlescent sheen. Dr. Finch stopped dead in his tracks, his hand covering his mouth. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since he arrived. "My word," he whispered, stepping closer to the greenhouse glass. "They're real. I've only seen sketches, references in forgotten journals. People thought it was a myth." He turned to me, his eyes shining with tears. "Mrs. Gable, do you have any idea what you have here?" Before I could answer, he continued, his voice trembling with scientific fervor. "The bioluminescence. We've theorized for years about its properties. A gentle, cold light that doesn't damage living tissue. The applications are staggering. We're talking about a potential revolution in medical imaging, in neurological research. The compound that creates this glow could literally light up diseases inside the human body. It's priceless." He used that word. Priceless. The sound of it seemed to hang in the air, thick and heavy, and it was at that exact moment that the screen door creaked open. Mark and Chloe stood on the patio, their arms crossed. Mark's eyes, usually dull with boredom, were sharp and focused. Chloe had lowered her phone. They had clearly been listening. "Priceless?" Mark asked, taking a step forward. His voice had lost its mocking tone, replaced now with a hungry, acquisitive edge. He looked from Dr. Finch to the shabby greenhouse, and then to me. The sneer was gone, replaced by the naked, calculating stare of a vulture that had just realized the dying animal it was watching was made of solid gold. I watched the transformation. It was like a switch had been flipped inside both of them. The casual cruelty and dismissiveness they wore like a second skin dissolved, replaced by a frantic, grasping warmth that was far more repulsive. Mark was suddenly by my side, his arm draped awkwardly over my shoulder. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" he said, his voice oozing a sincerity that made my skin crawl. "This is a major asset. We need to protect it. We need to get lawyers, form a corporation. We can't let this guy just take it from you." He shot a suspicious glare at Dr. Finch, as if the distinguished professor were a common swindler. It was astonishing. For years he'd told me to rip the garden out to lower the water bill, and now he was talking about it like it was a portfolio of stocks he needed to manage. Chloe was no better. Her phone was finally in her hand for a reason other than scrolling. She was pacing the patio, her mind racing. "Mom, this is huge. The story. A humble widow. A secret miracle plant. It's a gold mine. I can brand this. We can create a whole line of wellness products. Lumina by Gable. We'll be set for life." She looked at my simple garden, the one she'd called a mess not an hour before, and saw it now as a stage. She wasn't thinking about the science or the beauty. She was thinking about the fame, the interviews, the lifestyle brand she could build on the back of my life's work. They weren't looking at me. They were looking through me, at the money and status I now represented. Dr. Finch, a man of quiet dignity, looked at my children as if they were a puzzling and slightly distasteful new species of fungus. He cleared his throat, pointedly addressing only me. Mrs. Gable, my apologies for this intrusion. To be clear, the institution I represent, the Global Botanical Research Institute, is prepared to make a formal offer. We would fund the construction of a state-of-the-art research greenhouse here on your property, under your complete ownership, and we would offer an initial research grant to you, personally, of $3 million, simply for the rights to study, not own, a few clippings. $3 million. The number fell into the silence of the backyard and shattered it. I looked at Mark's face. The fake concern was gone, replaced by a raw, almost painful hunger. Chloe had stopped pacing, her jaw slack. The air crackled with their greed. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I felt a calmness settle over me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I looked at my two children, my two beautiful, grasping, hollow children, and then I turned to Dr. Finch. "Thank you, doctor," I said, my voice steady. "Why don't we go inside for some tea and discuss the details? Alone." The look on my children's faces was a cocktail of shock and fury. Mark stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Alone? Mom, what are you talking about? This is a multi-million-dollar deal. You can't just go in there by yourself. You need me to negotiate. This guy will take you for a ride." Chloe chimed in, her voice shrill with indignation. "He's right, Mom. This is a family matter. We're a family. You can't just cut us out." The word family sounded obscene coming from her lips. For years, I was just the woman who wrote checks and provided a roof. Now that I had something they wanted, we were suddenly a family. I gave them a look as cold and flat as a winter pond and said nothing as I closed the kitchen door in their faces, leaving them standing on the patio in stunned silence. Inside, sitting at my worn-out kitchen table, the atmosphere changed completely. Dr. Finch accepted a cup of tea, his demeanor gentle and respectful. "Your husband, Robert, he corresponded with my mentor 20 years ago," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "He sent him a pressed leaf and a diagram of the orchid's cellular structure. My mentor thought he was a brilliant crackpot. Robert was decades ahead of his time." Hearing him speak of my husband with such reverence brought a lump to my throat. This man, a stranger, understood Robert's legacy more in 5 minutes than my own children had in their entire lives. He saw me not as a foolish old woman, but as the custodian of that legacy. As he laid out the details of the Institute's proposal, I saw the shadows of Mark and Chloe pressed against the glass of the kitchen window, their ears practically glued to the pane. They were listening to every word, and I wanted them to. I wanted them to hear about the trust fund for future botanical research that would be established in my name. I wanted them to hear about the Robert Gable Memorial Scholarship for underprivileged students. I wanted them to hear every detail of the bright, beautiful future I was building, a future that had no room for them. After Dr. Finch finished, I set my teacup down with a soft click. "It's a wonderful offer, Doctor," I said, my voice steady and clear, loud enough to carry through the glass. "But before I accept, there is a condition, a legal matter that must be handled first." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "It concerns my children and the security of this project." Dr. Finch leaned forward slightly, his expression patient and serious. "Mrs. Gable, please. The integrity of this discovery is our highest priority. Tell me what you need." I took a deep breath, picturing my children's faces pressed against the glass, and I spoke the words I had been fantasizing about for a decade. "The condition is this, Doctor. Before any contract is signed, your institute's legal team will draft a new will for me, an ironclad one. This document will place this house, this land, and every single asset derived from the Lumina orchids, the grant money, future royalties, everything, into a charitable trust upon my death. The trust will be named after my husband and dedicated to funding botanical research. The will must also contain a specific clause stating that my two children, Mark Gable and Chloe Gable, are to be completely and irrevocably disinherited from this trust and this property. The silence that followed was so profound, I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Outside, the shadows at the window went rigid. Then, the kitchen door burst open, slamming against the wall with a violent crash. Mark stood there, his face a mottled, furious red. "You can't be serious!" he snarled, his voice shaking with rage. "Disinherited? After everything? That's our money! Dad's legacy belongs to us!" Chloe was right behind him, her face a mask of disbelief, tears of anger welling in her eyes. "How could you be so cruel, Mom? We are your family. You'd give our future away to some stranger, to a bunch of stupid plants." Her voice cracked on the word, family, the irony seemingly lost on her. "This house is our birthright." Their true selves were finally on display, stripped bare of the cheap costumes of concern they had put on just minutes before. The ugly, grasping entitlement was all that was left. They weren't mourning the loss of a mother's love or a family home. They were mourning the loss of a winning lottery ticket they hadn't even bought. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I looked from their twisted, furious faces to the calm, observant face of Dr. Finch. I gave him a small, sad smile. "As you can see, Doctor," I said quietly, my voice cutting through their tirade, "my condition is not only reasonable, it is absolutely necessary. They would tear this legacy apart before the soil on my grave was even settled." Mark's face went pale, then dark with a new kind of fury. The legal threat. "You're being manipulated," he spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He's taking advantage of you. You're not mentally competent to make a decision like this. I'll fight it. I'll get a lawyer. I'll have you declared unfit. I will see you in court before I let you give away our future." Chloe immediately switched tactics, her rage dissolving into a cascade of practiced theatrical tears. "Mom, please," she sobbed, reaching for my hand, which I pulled away. "Think about us. Your grandchildren. How can you be so heartless? Daddy would have wanted you to take care of us." The mention of their father was a calculated blow, and it landed with a dull thud. For a moment, the old guilt, the old instinct to sacrifice my own needs for theirs, flickered within me. But then I looked at her perfectly manicured hand, the one that had never once pulled a weed in my garden, and the flicker died. "Don't you dare invoke your father's name in this," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that surprised even myself. "Your father valued knowledge, patience, and beauty. He saw the world in a seed. You," I said, looking from Chloe's tear-streaked face to Mark's snarling one, "see the world only in a dollar sign. You are nothing like him." I stood up, my old bones aching less than my heart had for the past 2 decades. I felt tall. "Dr. Finch," I said, turning to him, "thank you for your patience. As for you two," I said, finally looking my children in the eye, "your father's legacy is in that garden. You have spent your lives trampling on it. You will not profit from it now. Get out of my house." The words hung in the air. For a second, they were too stunned to move. Then Mark let out a string of curses, promising lawsuits and ruin, while Chloe just stared at me, her mouth agape, as if seeing me for the very first time. They backed out of the kitchen, their rage filling the small space, and a moment later, the front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. The silence they left behind was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. Dr. Finch looked at me with deep sympathy. "He will try to sue, you know." I nodded. "I know." Dr. Finch pulled out his phone. "Our general counsel is one of the best in the country," he said, dialing a number. "He will be on the first flight tomorrow. We will protect you, Mrs. Gable, and we will protect Robert's legacy." The next morning, true to Dr. Finch's word, A quiet, expensive-looking sedan pulled up to my curb. A woman in a perfectly tailored gray suit and a younger man carrying a leather briefcase stepped out. They were from the Institute's legal department, and they radiated a calm, unshakable competence that was the exact opposite of my son's blustering rage. The lead counsel, a woman named Evelyn DeLuca, had sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She shook my hand firmly and said, "Mrs. Gable, Dr. Finch has briefed me. Our only job here is to execute your wishes and protect you from any harassment. Let's get to work." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where my children had demanded and wheedled and complained for years, and for the first time, I felt like the head of it. I told Ms. DeLuca everything. I told her about the thousands of dollars I'd given Mark for his failed business ventures, money I'd taken from my meager retirement savings. I told her about co-signing the lease for Chloe's apartment, a lease I was still legally on the hook for, and how she hadn't spoken to me for 3 months last year because I'd refused to pay for her vacation to Bali. I explained that for the last 5 years, they had been working together, a tag team of emotional manipulation, constantly pushing me to sell the house. "It's too much for you, Mom," they'd say. "We'll find you a nice little condo. Think of all the money you'll have." Miss DeLuca listened, taking precise notes. She never interrupted. When I was finished, she looked up, her expression firm. "They have established a clear and documented pattern of attempted financial exploitation," she said. "His threat to have you declared incompetent is a classic, desperate move. It will not work." Just then, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. It was a man in a cheap suit, a process server. He handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a letter from a local law firm, full of aggressive jargon and legal threats, formally notifying me of Mark's intent to file for an emergency conservatorship. He was moving fast. My hands trembled slightly as I held the papers. This was real. He was actually doing it. I was being sued by my own son. I wordlessly passed the envelope to Ms. DeLuca. She read it with a detached air, as if it were a weather report. A thin, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Excellent," she said, placing the papers neatly on the table. "He's arrogant and sloppy. He just gave us everything we need to bury him." The centerpiece of Mark's case, the competency evaluation, turned out to be the easiest part of the whole affair. I met with a kind, elderly psychiatrist named Dr. Evans. We talked for 2 hours. He asked a few standard questions, but mostly, he wanted to hear about the orchids. He was fascinated by Robert's work and my dedication to it. At the end of our meeting, he closed his notebook, smiled, and said, "Mrs. Gable, if pursuing your life's passion with vigor and intelligence is a sign of incompetence, then I pray I become half as incompetent as you are someday." 2 days later, Ms. DeLuca called me. Her voice was sharp with triumph. "The doctor's report is in. He describes you as having exceptional cognitive acuity and a profound sense of purpose. We just sent a copy to your son's lawyer. We also sent our motion to have his lawsuit dismissed and informed him that if he doesn't withdraw it within 24 hours, we will be suing him for malicious prosecution and seeking full legal fees. It's over, Mrs. Gable. All we have to do is wait for the surrender." The surrender came just before the 24-hour deadline expired. Ms. DeLuca called me. "They've withdrawn the petition," she said, her voice crisp with satisfaction. "His lawyer sent a groveling apology. They know they have no case, and more importantly, they know they can't afford to fight us. You're free, Mrs. Gable." A wave of relief so profound it almost brought me to my knees washed over me. It wasn't a triumphant, fist-pumping victory. It was a quiet, deep, and final exhalation. The war was over before it had truly begun, won not by a single battle, but by 20 years of quiet endurance. The next day, in a downtown office with a panoramic view of the city, I signed the documents, the new will, the trust agreement that would turn my husband's legacy into a force for good in the world. With each stroke of the pen, I felt a chain breaking. I wasn't just signing away a fortune. I was signing my Declaration of Independence. I didn't see them again for another week. I was walking home from the grocery store when I saw them, waiting at the end of my driveway. They stood right on the edge of the property line, unable to step foot on it because of the restraining order. They looked pathetic. Mark's usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a haggard desperation. Chloe's face was puffy from crying, her designer clothes looking rumpled and out of place. "Mom," Mark said, his voice cracking. "Please. We made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I was in debt. I panicked." Chloe stepped forward, her hands clasped as if in prayer. "We're sorry," she whispered. "Don't throw us away. We're your family. We love you." I stopped and looked at them, my two children, who had caused me more pain than anyone in the world. I searched their faces for any sign of genuine remorse, for any flicker of the children I had once loved so fiercely. I found nothing but self-pity and the terror of being cut off. "Love?" I said, and the word sounded hollow. "You had 20 years to show me love. You could have shown it by calling just to talk. You could have shown it by helping me pull weeds for an afternoon. You could have shown it by respecting the one thing that brought me joy." I looked at the new greenhouse gleaming in the sun behind them. This was never about money. It was about respect. You weren't disinherited last week in a lawyer's office. You disinherited yourselves, little by little, every time you treated me like an inconvenience and my garden like a patch of dirt. The consequences are now simply catching up with you. I turned my back on them and walked up my driveway, toward my house, my sanctuary, my future, and I never looked back.